If the story of Noah's flood actually happened, then the most uncomfortable question isn't whether the earth was really covered in water. It's who was left underneath it. According to the story, the world was full of wickedness. But does that mean everyone was guilty? Or did innocents drown too, quietly, without protest, swallowed up in the name of cleansing something broken? We like stories with clear sides, good versus evil, just versus wicked. But the flood story forces a different confrontation. What if the flood wasn't about good people surviving, but just chosen people? What if innocent children, people who never harmed anyone, animals, pregnant women, all perished, while only one family floated to safety? Can justice ever really be that selective? Or is survival a privilege, not a reward? The Bible says the earth was corrupt, that every intention of human thought was evil. But that claim itself is hard to digest. Could every single person really have deserved death? Or is that a story we tell so we can accept it without flinching? Because if even one innocent soul was lost beneath those waters, then the flood becomes something far more disturbing than a divine rescue. Imagine a toddler playing in the dirt as the sky darkens. She has no idea what's coming. She's never sinned, never lied, never hurt anyone. When the flood arrives, does she drown anyway? And if she does, what does that say about how we define justice? About how we view innocence, worth, and who gets to survive? Some believers argue God is beyond our morality, that divine justice doesn't follow human rules. But that's the same logic used to excuse any atrocity, so long as it comes from power. If we wouldn't accept that kind of reasoning from a human ruler, why do we accept it from a divine one? Is justice still justice when it's unquestionable, or does it become something else entirely? Others say the flood was necessary, that evil had overtaken the world, and starting over was the only way. But even in human terms, we never destroy entire cities because some people commit crimes. We try to separate the guilty from the innocent. We weigh, we judge, we consider context. Can we honestly say that every person on earth deserved death? No trial, no choice, no voice? Animals were also destroyed. Species wiped out. Creatures with no moral agency. They didn't sin. They didn't rebel. They simply lived hunted, mated, migrated. Why should they suffer for the actions of humans? Was the flood meant to cleanse creation or punish it? If the innocent suffer alongside the guilty, is that cleansing or just collateral damage? Think about the people who never heard Noah's message. Maybe they lived far away. Maybe they were isolated tribes, unknown to the builders of the ark. Were they warned? Were they given a chance to change? Or were they erased without appeal? Caught in a flood sent for sins they never even understood? Does the lack of knowledge protect you or doom you faster? And what about the mentally ill, the disabled, the young, the unborn? Did they deserve the same judgment as murderers and tyrants? Did they choose corruption? Or were they simply born into a world they didn't build? These are not just theological questions, they're moral ones. And they force us to ask, is divine punishment ever fair if it doesn't account for the powerless? The idea that God regretted creating humanity is terrifying. That's what the story says, that God felt sorrow. And the solution? Wipe it all away. Start over. But regret usually leads to reflection, not destruction. Is it comforting to believe in a God who erases mistakes with a flood? Or is it more disturbing than we want to admit? We've tried to sanitize the story. Children's books show smiling animals and rainbows. But at its core, this is a story of global annihilation, a divine apocalypse. The rainbow isn't just a symbol of hope, it's a mark left after unimaginable loss. Can we separate the beauty from the blood? Or do we need the comfort of symbolism to forget the horror beneath? If God chose Noah because he was righteous, does that mean he was perfect? Or just good enough? And if good enough gets you saved, what does that mean for everyone else? Were they just unlucky, less obedient, less seen, less chosen? Or were they simply born on the wrong side of a judgment they never asked for? Some argue the flood was metaphor, a symbolic tale about renewal. But even if it's not literal, the story's moral message lingers. And that's the point. Because whether or not the flood really happened, people still believe in the kind of justice it represents: total, final, indiscriminate. And that belief shapes how we treat others, especially those we deem irredeemable. In ancient cultures, floods were symbols of power. Many civilizations told flood myths. But the question isn't whether they happened, it's why they were told. Floods erase everything. They reset the world. And maybe that's the fear beneath the story. That we are all one divine disappointment away from being washed away. That no matter how we try, we can be undone without warning. We don't like to talk about divine cruelty. It makes us uncomfortable. But if we're honest, the flood is cruel if taken literally. Total extinction for a moral reset. That's not mercy. That's a purge. And if we excuse it because God did it, are we just choosing belief over empathy? Is faith worth more than compassion for those who didn't make it to the ark? The flood asks us to trust that justice was done, that everyone who died deserved to die. But if you've ever watched someone suffer unfairly, you know that reality rarely works that cleanly. Innocent people suffer all the time. So why would the ancient world be any different? Unless the story itself is a mirror not of divine will, but of human fear. Maybe the flood is not about water. Maybe it's about the terror of being forgotten. The fear that no matter how hard we try, we can be swept away, unremembered, unloved. The ark becomes a symbol, not just of salvation, but of being noticed. And maybe that's what we long for, not just to be saved, but to be seen, to matter. The story of the flood ends with a promise never again. A covenant, a rainbow. But what kind of promise is that, if the first action was so absolute? How do we trust that destruction won't return when the precedent has already been set? Is a promise still comforting when it comes after the damage is already done? Maybe we tell flood stories to make sense of chaos, to imagine control in the face of nature's rage. Maybe the flood isn't about punishment at all, but grief. The grief of a God watching a world spiral. The grief of humans who survived the cataclysm. The grief of anyone who's ever lost everything and needed a reason why. If the flood happened, then it forces a truth we'd rather avoid. That mass death is sometimes justified in divine narratives. That erasure can be righteous. That innocence can be swept away with barely a footnote. And once we accept that, what else will we excuse? What other stories will we allow to justify suffering? In the end, maybe the story of Noah is less about righteousness and more about obedience. Noah followed instructions, built what he was told, did what was asked, and was saved. Everyone else? Not obedient, not chosen, gone. That's not a story of justice. That's a story of loyalty rewarded and indifference punished. And it complicates everything we thought we knew. We want to believe in fairness, in second chances, in a morality that accounts for complexity. But the flood doesn't offer that. It's binary, saved or not, ark or water. And in that binary, there's no room for nuance, no room for questioning, just drowning. And if that's the morality of the divine, where does that leave us? We don't like to imagine innocent people dying. But maybe the flood's most uncomfortable truth is that innocence doesn't always protect you. That sometimes being innocent isn't enough. And if that's true in this ancient story, it might be true in our world too, which is why we still wrestle with it. Why it still haunts us. Because deep down, we want to believe that goodness is rewarded, that the world is fair, that no one suffers without reason. But the flood challenges that. It suggests a world where survival is less about goodness and more about proximity to power. And that's a reality far more frightening than any flood.